On December 17, 1903, Wilbur and Orville Wright of Dayton, Ohio, flew the first powered flight at Kitty Hawk. This first flight remained airborne for 12 seconds and covered 120 feet, approximately the distance between the wingtips of one of today's larger jets. This new technology progressed so rapidly that in less than 80 years, man had landed on the moon and had begun shuttle flights into space. The airplane was first used for reconnaissance purposes in World War I, but it quickly developed into an armed instrument of war. Even before World War I ended, the Post Office Department established airmail service from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia, using U.S. Army pilots and open cockpit airplanes for the purpose. By 1925, the Postal Service Department was regularly flying mail between New York and San Francisco with 15 stops en route, something like an airborne Pony Express. Later that year, having proven that commercial aviation was feasible, the Postmaster General turned the task of flying mail over to private contractors. Harold F. Pitcairn, who manufactured aircraft for county fair exhibits, was awarded the contract to fly mail between New York and Atlanta, a distance of 792 miles. He immediately began to develop an airplane especially designed for flying mail. Also in 1926, Florida Airways began one of the nation's first regularly scheduled airmail, passenger, and express services that flew from Miami to Jacksonville by way of Fort Myers and Tampa. Pitcairn bought out Florida Airways and was awarded the government contract to carry airmail between Atlanta, Tampa, and Miami, a route of 619 miles. He now possessed a contract for an airmail route that went from Miami to New York, a distance of 1,411 miles. On the night of May 1st, 1928, the date that stands as the official start of the history of Eastern Airlines, Pitcairn Aviation flew its first pattern of airmail delivery flights. During the next year, the mail routes were extended to include Jacksonville, Daytona Beach, Orlando, and Tampa, St. Petersburg, Florida, and Macon, Georgia. In July 1929, Pitcairn sold the airline to North American Aviation for $2.5 million. In January 1930, the airline's name was changed to Eastern Air Transport Incorporated. Eastern Air Transport's corporate relatives included the Curtiss, Wright, and Sperry manufacturing companies. The inventive Sperry brothers soon had Eastern pilots taking directions from dials and gyroscopes. As a result of this association, we were the first to demonstrate the automatic pilot on a transport plane. Though passenger service was slow to develop in the United States, Eastern Air Transport prepared itself to carry passengers and purchased 6 Curtiss Condors, 14 Kingbirds, and 1 Ford Tri-Motor at a total cost that wouldn't even equal the price of 3 engines for today's jets. On August 18, 1930, with 11 cash customers, a spare tail wheel in the 12th seat, and 5 pounds of mail, Eastern Air Transport inaugurated the first passenger service between New York and Washington. By 1932, it had become possible to fly from New York to Miami in one day. An Eastern plane left New York at 8 a.m., making stops at Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, and Richmond, where lunch was served. Passengers then continued to Raleigh, Florence, Charleston, Savannah, and Jacksonville, where dinner was served, and they changed planes. After dinner, the flight continued to Daytona Beach in Miami, arriving there at 9:50 p.m., 13 hours and 50 minutes after leaving. The airline promoted the feat with a radio jingle, "From frost to flowers in 14 hours.
Let's take a plane, laugh at snowstorms and rain to Miami, where life is okay. You fly from frost to flowers."
In 1933, control of North American aviation was taken over by General Motors. A former racing driver and World War I flying ace, Captain Edward V. Rickenbacker, commander of the Hat and the Ring Squadron, was hired as a vice president and later put in charge of Eastern. By the close of 1934, it was possible to fly from New York to Miami in 8 hours. This reduction of almost 6 hours over the old flying time was made possible because of the new DC-2. Captain Eddie, as he was known, took over the company as general manager January 1st, 1935. The airline had just finished the previous year with a loss. Rickenbacker took immediate steps to put Eastern under a tighter financial rein and proceeded to generate a profit in 1935. His first move was to cut out the frills in flying and initiate a rigid system of cost control. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep the airplanes in faultless condition. Eastern's perfect record during the difficult pioneer passenger years 1930 to 1938 was recognized with the first Airline Safety Award. In addition to rigid cost controls, Rickenbacker stressed efficiency. He was quick to recognize the value of the Douglas DC-3. In 1938, with a group of associates, Captain Rickenbacker bought the company for $3.5 million and became its president as well as general manager. As a startling comparison, today, one L-1011 costs approximately $38.8 million. When World War II was declared, half the company's fleet of 40 airplanes was leased to the armed forces, but the remaining aircraft were kept busier than ever. Commercial aviation expanded rapidly after World War II. In 1946, Eastern inaugurated service between Miami and Puerto Rico. Later that year, the DC-4, which had proved itself as a troop carrier during the war, was introduced. Until that time, the largest civilian airplane in operation could only carry 21 passengers. But now, 56 people could travel on one plane. Lockheed Constellations joined the Eastern Fleet in 1947. And in 1951, both the Super Constellations and twin-engine Martin 404s made their debuts. Besides carrying more passengers, the passenger compartments of these aircraft were pressurized. With pressurization, planes could fly at higher altitudes than ever before, thereby increasing the speed and the smoothness of the flights. With this airplane, the travel time from New York to Miami was reduced to 4 hours. In the 50s, people throughout the country were talking about computers and the amazing speed with which they could figure things. The reservations offices were now located in the downtown areas of the cities rather than out at the airports, and plans were being made to computerize them. By 1953, when the Great Silver Fleet was celebrating its silver 25th anniversary, we had carried more than 25 million passengers. Captain Eddy, who stepped up to the post of chairman in August of that year, said, "We've just begun to grow." On June 1st, 1956, Colonial Airlines, which served Bermuda, Canada, and many upstate New York and New England cities, was merged into the Eastern system. In 1957, Eastern expanded its international service to Mexico City. By the end of the 1950s, Eastern had entered the jet age with its prop jet Electras, and in 1960 placed its first pure jet Douglas DC-8s in service. During 1961 and early 1962, Boeing 720s joined the fleet. With the advent of the jet age, you could go from frost to flowers in just under 2.5 hours. On April 30th, 1961, Eastern inaugurated the now famous Air Shuttle, linking Washington, D.C., New York City, and Boston. The hourly, no reservations, guaranteed seat Air Shuttle was hailed by the chairman of the Civil Aeronautics Board as the only really new idea in air transportation since the airlines came under CAV regulation in 1938. The Air Shuttle today operates with jets in single-class seating configuration and is the most essential mode of transportation between the 3 key Northeast cities. In 1963, Captain Eddy retired, and a new management team took over. That same year, a new breed of aircraft was introduced to the public, the Boeing 727. This airplane was well received by the public and was soon aptly named the Whisper Jet. In 1965, the DC-9 brought the jet age to the smaller cities throughout most of the country, and the whole airline got a new look as everything from airplane paint schemes to employee uniforms were dramatically upgraded in appearance. In 1967, Eastern began flying the DC-861s, and later on, DC-863s would be added. This plane carried 203 passengers and a crew of 8. Eastern also obtained a route to Seattle, Washington, and through a merger with Mackey Airlines, we moved into the Bahama Islands. On July 20th, 1969, man first landed on the moon. and a man who had been an important part of this program became associated with Eastern Airlines. Colonel Frank Borman joined Eastern in 1969 as a technical consultant, and the next year became Senior Vice President of Operations. 1970 was the year we obtained the Atlanta-Los Angeles Route Award. In 1972, Eastern became the first airline to fly the Lockheed Tri-Star, commonly known as the L-1011, which we call the Whisper Liner. The L-1011 can carry as many as 297 passengers, plus a cockpit crew of 3 and a cabin crew of from 7 to 10 flight attendants. The crew size alone is as large as the passenger capacity of the Ford Tri-Motor. In 1973, the CAB approved our merger with Carabair, and our system route map was expanded to include the islands of the Lower Caribbean, Martinique, Haiti, Aruba, Antigua, Trinidad, St. Martin, St. Lucia, Santo Domingo, and Barbados became new sun destinations of our vacation airline. In 1974, Eastern's corporate headquarters were moved from New York to Miami, and it was in that same year that the fuel crisis hit the airline industry. Eastern cut its schedules because of a lack of available fuel, and when the fuel did become available, the cost skyrocketed. The Arab oil embargo had triggered the 1974-75 recession. The economic slump coming on the heels of Eastern's large outlay for the L-1011 dropped the company to a loss of nearly $90 million for 1975. During the height of these financial problems, Colonel Borman became president and chief executive officer. He took immediate steps to revamp the company's top-heavy management and even persuaded contract and non-contract employees alike to take part in a wage freeze during 1976. Employees, to save their jobs and the company, made the sacrifice so Eastern could regain credibility in financial markets and obtain funding to update its aging fleet. With the help of the wage freeze and stringent cost controls, plus a reviving economy, Eastern soared to a record $45.2 million profit in 1976. Despite that impressive performance, the company needed further help from its employees to ensure its profitability and enable it to buy newer, more productive aircraft necessary for the future. Colonel Borman, now president and chairman, persuaded employees to invest a portion of their wages on Eastern's profitability. In December 1977, Eastern became the first U.S. carrier to operate the A300, a two-engine, wide-bodied aircraft capable of carrying some 230 passengers. It's manufactured in Europe by a consortium of aircraft companies, and it's powered with American-built jet engines. Under Borman's direction, the most innovative and most complicated aircraft purchase plan in aviation history was made. Eastern's annual fuel costs had climbed from $112 million in 1973 to $375 million in 1977, and close to $1 billion by 1982. So for the first time in aviation history, airliners of the future would be judged not by greater speed, but by increased efficiency, with fuel economy equaling capacity in importance. The A300 uses 30% less fuel than the Boeing 727s and 20% less than the L-1011s. To an airline the size of Eastern, a 1 cent per gallon hike in the cost of fuel means at least $10 million more in direct annual operating cost. Eastern will be the first airline to fly the Boeing 757. The 757 will have up to a 48% reduction in fuel use per passenger seat mile compared with the medium-range aircraft they will replace. In 1978, the airline industry was deregulated, and Eastern expanded its routes based on careful, critical analysis of the marketplace. We started to fly to San Francisco from Miami and Atlanta. We expanded westward, adding cities like Salt Lake City, Oklahoma City, Las Vegas, Albuquerque, El Paso, Tucson, Phoenix, and Austin. We entered the transcon market from New York to San Francisco and Los Angeles. We expanded south to additional Caribbean and Central American countries. In 1982, Eastern experienced its largest single expansion in 54 years of operation when it acquired the routes to South America from Braniff International Airways. The new routes gave us service to 10 cities in 8 Central and South American countries. Our full-scale entry into Central and South America created a widespread pattern of service from our Miami hub, providing travelers for the first time with an unprecedented amount of single airline service. From 1903 to today, aviation has grown tremendously. From the days of a pilot setting his aircraft down in a pasture and making his own repairs, to today, when a mechanic uses the most modern methods of analyzing the performance of a jet engine. From a simple instrument panel in the cockpit to this. From a simple Coke and sandwich to this. From a simple loading procedure to this. We're still growing and looking toward the future. The giant step from piston to jet represented an unparalleled leap in productivity for the airline industry. However, we've been in the jet age for more than 2 decades now, and there's no similar technological breakthrough on the horizon. The major goal in current and future aircraft design is greater fuel efficiency, represented in our A300s and the Boeing 757, our aircraft of the 80s. The continuing escalation in jet fuel prices has mandated this goal as essential to the economic survival of the industry. Eastern's future growth will depend upon our most important asset, people. In reality, the history of Eastern is not its aircraft, but it's the men and women who fly the airplanes, who load mail and cargo, sell tickets, and clean and maintain the aircraft. It's the employees who develop new ideas and creative approaches to our industry. Eastern is extremely proud of the part it's played in the development of modern commercial aviation. The people of Eastern will play a major role in enriching this proud heritage as the future of manned flight continues to unfold in one of the most exciting and certainly the most challenging eras in commercial aviation.